The rocket motors, running on a combination of hydrazine and nitric acid, will have a combustion pressure of 214 pounds per square inch at a temperature of 4,660 degrees Fahrenheit. In space, we can make the fullest use of the simple fact that we are surrounded by a vacuum and can expand the combustion gases to the very low pressure of 0.14 pounds per square inch absolute.
Obviously, the 0.14 psi generated by von Braun's theoretical moonship is considerably lower than the 1.5 psi that Plate attributes to the LEM. And of course, the exhaust gases of von Braun's mammoth moonship would have spread out over a much wider area. Yet, von Braun states quite confidently that even this lower pressure would have been enough to dig a crater beneath his moonship. Why would von Braun, the Nazi rocket scientist who went on to build the Saturn V, be concerned about 0.14 psi exhaust digging a hole under his lunar lander if such a crater is not to be expected by a single engine running at 1.5 psi? According to Ralph René, 1.5 psi is 3 times as powerful as the common garden leaf blower. On Earth, the LEM weighed 14,696 kilograms. On the Moon, this would be nearly 2,500 kilograms, which is about the weight of a Cadillac Escalade ESV. Can you imagine how many leaf blowers would be required to gently land something as heavy as a sports utility vehicle?
That thing had to come down with a few hundred psi, or the son of a bitch couldn't have settled down. Any less than that, it would come down very fast. Any more, it would have pushed it back up in the air. Up in the air, away from the surface.
Sure, if you place 3 leaf blowers for every square inch underneath, there will eventually be enough. But it would also make one hell of a disturbance to loose rock and soil.
Well, you know, the leaf blower is a half a psi max. And it tears up rock, it shoots sand all over the place. Let alone the fine shit that they allegedly had there.
If half a psi can wipe a surface clean of dust and tiny rocks, you'd expect something similar underneath an engine supposedly operating at 3 times that pressure. And yet, there are still pebbles and even loose particles directly underneath the engine bell.
They couldn't even blow the loose dust away. Hence the footprint so clear underneath the shroud, the engine shroud.
Bill Casing also believed that the LEM's exhaust should have left a trail of melted dust and perhaps a pit of softened rock directly below the engine bell. On page 171 of the Desert Publications edition of his book, Bill Casing writes, "The flame temperature is close to 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, capable of melting particulate matter in seconds." In response, Windley claims,
"The exhaust gas was 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit in the combustion chamber where most of the combustion took place. At the nozzle exit, the temperature was about 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and as the plume expands into the vacuum of space, it cools very rapidly, down to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit or so. By the time it strikes the lunar surface, it is not hot enough to melt it."
To be exact, according to Wernher von Braun, the gases of his theoretical moonship, when exposed to the vacuum of space, are reduced from 4,660 degrees Fahrenheit to 1,310 degrees Fahrenheit. And obviously, the gases of von Braun's moonship would have spread out over a much wider distance than on Apollo. Windley goes on to write,
"The lunar surface is composed of rock and dust. It takes a tremendous amount of heat concentrated on such material for a long period of time to melt it. We collected some desert rocks and dust and heated them with an oxyacetylene torch, 5,700 degrees Fahrenheit, for 5 minutes. They did not melt, and they were only slightly discolored."
However, if you go to allexperts.com, A geologist by the name of C. Robert Rezka Jr. tells us that most rocks melt at a temperature between 600 and 1000 degrees Celsius. 600 degrees Celsius is 1112 degrees Fahrenheit. 1000 degrees Celsius is 1832 degrees Fahrenheit. By von Braun's admission, exhaust gases with a temperature of 1310 degrees Fahrenheit could most certainly melt rocks with a melting point of 1112 degrees Fahrenheit. And both melting points are much lower than the temperatures produced by an oxytorch. So I must ask, Jay Windley, what the hell kind of rocks were you exposing your oxyacetylene torch to? According to Robert Rezka, your rock should have easily melted from your 5000 degree Fahrenheit plume. Looking at everything we have established, 500-pound thrust engines burning holes in concrete, astrophysicists concerned of the danger the engine would have caused, engine plume temperatures being above the melting point of rock, obviously, all the scientific data says there should have been a blast crater under the LEM. Bill Kaysing considered this one of the most conclusive pieces of evidence supporting a hoax. So it should be no wonder why so many propagandists are jumping on it. Earlier, in my radiation documentary, we looked at a certain passage from the book Countdown, in which Apollo 8 astronaut Frank Borman jumps on the attacks. Here is that passage again. The whole Apollo program made a lot of scientists look foolish, starting with those who had pronounced the Van Allen radiation belts an insurmountable barrier to spaceflight. I've long since refused to take the word of any scientist as gospel. Thomas Gold, a professor of astronomy, had earned himself quite a few headlines before Project Apollo by predicting that a moon landing would be disastrous. He said that the moon was covered in a thick layer of dust that would not only make vision a problem, but would act like quicksand if an astronaut tried to walk on the lunar surface. Many scientists from all over the world were initially unsure whether the lunar surface was strong enough to support a craft. That's why the Americans sent their surveyor probes to test the stability. Why does Frank Borman single out Dr. Gold? Could it be perhaps he was right about the moon dust clinging onto the LEM footpads and windows? Borman goes on to say this about Dr. Gold. Unfortunately, there exist in the academic and scientific community self-appointed experts with axes to grind, and those axes are coated with phony glibness that glides smoothly over any data or evidence that might refute their claims. Thanks to the news media, especially television, they never seem to lose their credibility, even after they've been proved wrong. Apollo 11 should have discredited Gold permanently, but it didn't. Doesn't this sound like a picture-perfect description of the propagandists? Typically, when discussing conspiracy theorists, propagandists tend to attribute their own foibles to their enemies and try to make them out to be the liars. As we have demonstrated, the propagandists and NASA will go to any lengths to dismiss or misrepresent evidence that refutes their claims, be it altering transcripts, giving incorrect numbers, representing two completely different things as though they were the same, giving half-truths, making omissions, and outright lying.